Okay, good morning. My name is Bryan Ehrenfreund. I'm the Vice President of Digital Strategies with Televerde. We're a B2B integrated demand generation agency. Hopefully everybody's here for the secret of lead nurturing, the intersection of the human and digital touch. I'm here today also co-presenting with Jon Miller with Marketo. Jon, say a few words.
Hi everyone, great to be here. Good to have a chance to talk to you. I am Jon Miller. I'm the Vice President of Marketing, co-founder at Marketo. I'm also the author of the Modern B2B Marketing blog, which is, I think, currently ranked number 68 on the Ad Age Power 150, as well as the author of a book called The Definitive Guide to Lead Nurturing, which you can buy on Amazon, but you can also get for free if you just Google the word lead nurturing. So check that out, and we're excited to have the opportunity to share at least some of the key ideas and secrets from that book here today.
Terrific. So a couple of things that I just want to kind of put out there. We're going to define what nurture is all about, really what it is, so everybody has a good understanding, and why the human touch is still very important to the whole process. Question about, though, the timing. When do you actually invoke the human touch into the process? We'll talk about that. Also, what resources will you need when you're looking at putting together a lead nurturing program or a campaign? And then last but not least, and near to my heart, is some considerations for an agency model. When Jon and I were putting this together a few weeks ago, he felt that if he was sitting in the audience, it's something that he'd want to hear from an agency perspective, and we're hoping that you'd be interested in hearing about that as well. So I'm going to make a quick case for nurture. I mean, if you've ever seen before, if there's ever a time for statistics, both Jon and myself have experienced this personally, for me with the clients that we work with, generating 50% more sales-ready opportunities. And really the whole thing, and we'll get into the definition of lead nurturing, but really is the whole concept of holding back. I like to use the pie is in the oven. It's just not ready. You take it out, it's not going to taste too well. Same thing with a lead. If you bring it out too soon, it's not ready. And for all my years in sales, I can tell you I've dealt with a lot of leads that, quite frankly, weren't sales ready, and ends up that you get a lot of salespeople just ignore those types of leads. So there's some very compelling statistics. Our presentation will be available after the session. Feel free to go through them. But we can make a very compelling case for why this is so valuable. Jon's going to talk a little bit about the definition of lead nurturing and kind of how he sees it.
Lead nurturing as a concept is, what, 5, 6 years old? And frankly, 10 years ago, lead nurturing didn't matter, right? 10 years ago, if you got a new lead, the only way that lead was going to get the information that they needed to evaluate and purchase the product was to go talk to a salesperson, because it wasn't available on your website. It wasn't available on all these different social sites. So you didn't have to nurture leads. We all know that's not the world anymore. Today, you get a lead. They don't want to talk to a salesperson until 70% of the buying process is done. And so you now all of a sudden have this gap that's been created between when you first get somebody as a marketer in your database and when they want to go to sales. So the formal definition of lead nurturing is basically developing relationships with these qualified prospects who could buy from you one day, but they're not ready to buy from you today. And how do you essentially close that gap? I think more colloquially, the way I think about it is you're going to educate yourself. You're going to go through your whole buying process. How can I stay in touch with you during that cycle? How do I maintain permission to stay in touch with you as you go through that process? Because and then ultimately maintaining that permission is all about relevance. Because if I'm not being relevant with you, you're going to opt out. Or more likely, you're going to emotionally opt out, which means you'll just stop paying attention. You guys all see this, I'm sure. You get how many emails a day that you just don't pay attention to, right? So nurturing is really ultimately about relevance.
Well, a little quick point I want to make about it. If it's done correctly, it's really all about the velocity then of the process. Because if it is really cooked and it's really baked in the oven, so to speak, it'll move much, much quickly through the sales process. So back in my early years in sales, I was responsible basically for the nurturing relationship. Now, sales isn't out of that nurturing relationship, but it's when it's a qualified lead opportunity, and that's really the key.
So I really think there's two dimensions to relevance. Again, it's the right message at the right time. So across my top dimension that we show here, this is the stage. Where is that person in their buying process? Right? And I break the stage up into early stage. This is somebody who's not looking to buy today. Mid-stage, They're starting to think about it. They're starting to figure out, do they need, what kind of features do they need? What kinds of capabilities? What are the vendors out there? What are the criteria they should be thinking about? Late stage, which is they're in an active buying cycle, right? And then they're going to need different types of information, and ultimately customer, right? And it's really important in terms of maintaining relevance to send information that's relevant to where they are. If you start sending information about your company to somebody who's an early stage buyer who's not even thinking about buying your product, it's not relevant. You're going to annoy them. The vertical dimension here is who are they? Because people want information that's specific to who they are. Marketing Sherpa did a study a couple years ago, and they asked people, what kind of content do you find somewhat or highly more relevant to you? 82% of people said that they want information specific to their industry. Right, so that's probably the most important dimension to personalize your nurturing information about. People want to know about what other companies in their industry are doing. You tell somebody what their competitor is doing, they're really, really interested. The second dimension is role, right? Are they an executive? Are they a doer? Right? Are they IT or are they line of business? There's different ways to segment role. At Marketo, we do it 3 ways. We have marketing, sales, and executive, and we don't really talk to IT very much. Right? But somehow, split it up by role. The third most important dimension is company size. Right? Clearly, if you're selling to the Global 2000, right, don't send them a case study about a $3 million a year company. It's not relevant to them, and vice versa. And then lastly, geography. If you're a global organization, you want to personalize your nurturing content for your APAC market, your EMEA market, your North America markets, and so on. So it's really about making sure you've got content, in both, every cell of that two-dimensional grid. That's how you ensure relevance.
One piece I'll add to that is maybe a third step, which is to look at the demand type. One of the things that we try to look at and really aligning with our customers, understand what type of product and what type of demand are you trying to create. If it's a product that's already been in the marketplace, there's a different messaging and different relevance of that messaging that you want to deliver. So it's very key to look at the different types of demands. And actually, Serious Decisions has done some work on that, looking at if it's a new paradigm type of product, a new concept product. So there's a lot of information out in the marketplace in regards to that, and I'm happy to talk to you about that afterwards as well. Near and dear to my heart as well is the human touch. I mean, why does that matter? At Televerde, we began our life in our company as a telecompany, hence the name Televerde. And it's really a mix of art and science. It's really about knowing, when to make that call. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. How do you determine when it's ready for a call? And Jon and I actually philosophically agree on, earlier is better than later, and we'll talk more about that. But it's a continuous process. It's not something that is basically you start, you stop, and perhaps you don't start it again. It's a continually calling effort. I've seen statistics anywhere from, it takes up to 16 calls before you get and reach that contact between calls and emails and voicemail messages. We average between 6 and 8. I don't know, how many salespeople do we have in the audience here? All marketers? Well, a couple of salespeople. So I spent the large majority of my career in sales, and I'll tell you, I prided myself on follow-up, but many of my colleagues didn't. So follow-up was one of the best virtues that we had as far as really a continuous process. So it's real key as far as that human touch. So one of the things that the human touch really, for us, enables is what we call VCA, validate, correct, and accelerate. So the digital behaviors are wonderful. I mean, by the way, one thing I didn't mention, we are an agency partner of Marketo, so we're intimately involved in working with our clients and customers, looking at the digital behaviors when they've downloaded a white paper, a video. But, and the big but is, it can only tell you so much information. Until you get the human touch involved in the process, that's when we validate that that behavior that we're seeing is correct. And if it's not, what we do is that we do correct the information. Maybe it's they're researching information for somebody in their department, or it's something that they're doing for research. But then what we do, and here's what the real key is when it comes down to relevance of the message, is that if we find out that that nurture track they were in is not correct, we accelerate them and have a specific nurture track for their interest. And that's really what's really key about the human touch. For us, and I'll have Jon speak to his numbers, but for us, we invoke the human touch very early on to basically go through the validate, correct, and accelerate process. And what we find is that roughly 90% of what we find out need to go back into some sort of nurture. So the nurture process doesn't end. It's just really the beginning. What I mentioned before is about that timing of the human touch. You know, how do you determine when to do it? John's going to talk a lot about the scoring aspect, and we use that as really our barometer. So we're using lead scoring, looking at the behaviors, and we have models. And the thing that I want to just highlight, what we invoke into the behavior in our lead scoring models is that human touch. So the human touch does belong part of the model, and it actually can either score up the lead score, or actually, quite frankly, can bring it down. So that's something that we've invoked as far as the human touch aspect.
The way we think about it is, you know, we're nurturing folks, you know, we're sending them that relevant information over email, we're dripping that out to them. Obviously, if they're not responding to the emails, we're doing something different. But, you know, it's not just about email. You cannot develop a relationship with somebody purely over electronic communications, right? And that's, to me, why the human touch is so important. And then the $64,000 question is when, right? When is it time to do the human touch? There's a lot of different strategies out there, right? You might say it's just a cadence. You know, hey, you should try reaching out to them every 3 months, et cetera. You know, we try to think about it as being really sensitive to the buyer's time, right? We want to, you know, the way I think about it, the ideal time to call somebody is when they're at a place where they need some information, right? And they can't easily get that information anymore with their own online search, right? What I tell my team is if the person needs information that they could find out with 5 minutes on Google versus 5 minutes talking to you, it's probably not time to talk to them. And so that's our strategy. It's not for everybody, that's what we do. So ultimately, that's where we use lead scoring to say, who are those people who we think are at that place in the buying cycle? So you know, this scoring matrix here breaks, you know, identifies people both in terms of fit, how interested are we in them, in terms of, you know, because obviously we want to be calling the right people, and then their interest in terms of what kind of behaviors have they shown. And by looking at those behaviors, the explicit things that they tell us, like band criteria, but more importantly, the implicit things that they do, that's how we start to narrow in on who we think is kind of at that magic moment of wanting to talk to us. Go to the next slide. So ultimately, that's about behaviors. There are a lot of lead scoring algorithms out there that track people's behaviors, and I think many of them are flawed in a key way. And the reason why they're flawed is because they're tracking engagement and not buying intent, right? Especially if you're good at content marketing, which if you're doing a lot of lead nurturing, you probably are. You're publishing a lot of content, right? Just because somebody's reading your blog or going to your webinar or, you know, downloading your white papers doesn't necessarily mean that they're in a buying stage or they're at that magic moment for calling. So it's important to track those behaviors and score those behaviors, but then we separate out the buying behaviors, the things that we've shown are highly correlated with somebody actually looking to purchase the product. Again, it's going to be different for every industry. For us at Marketo, the most highly correlated things are going to our pricing pages, watching our long-form detailed demos, downloading late-stage content like analyst reports, and then actually using the keyword Marketo. So it's when we see those buying signs, we think perhaps it's time to call. So ultimately, for us, that breaks up into a matrix like you see here, where on the vertical axis, we're saying how good of a fit are you, right? Because, you know, to be honest, if you're a really good fit, high target person, we don't need you to show as much buying intent. Whereas, excuse me, somebody who's a little bit less qualified, we're going to wait till they show more buying intent before we call them. And then on the bottom, you see there's two scores. There's the engagement score and the buying intent score. Somebody has to show relatively an extremely high amount of engagement before we call them, and then very much so when you do call them, it's a very different kind of conversation.
So it leads us to timing is everything. There was a recent study by InsideSales.com that said leads can be qualified 21 times faster if followed up within 5 minutes. That was really interesting when I saw this study because about 20 years ago when I was working at Xerox, we actually did a study and nothing's changed. It's exactly the same. So it was actually very interesting to see this kind of information. So the key takeaway here is you really need to create a process that really moves the opportunities to the calling team efficiently. And we're going to talk about, you know, different types of strategies as far as moving it to the calling team and how you might go about that.
So the number one piece of advice I have for the human touch is to make sure you have somebody who's dedicated to doing it. Don't rely on the salespeople. Right? As Bryan just said, when somebody raises their hand, when somebody shows that buying intent, they're at that magic moment when they need information that they can't get off of 5 minutes on Google. Right? You want to call them then. Right? They're at their desk. They're thinking about you. Right? If you try to rely on a salesperson to do that follow-up, right, it's not going to happen because they may be on a plane. They may be in a demo. Right? So even if the best intentioned salesperson won't get that magic 5 minutes follow-up. So we believe very strongly in having dedicated resources. At Marketo, I manage a team. I'm in marketing, but I manage the team of sales development reps who this is their job, is they follow up with people at the right time with that right relevant human touch message. Question is, it's not always appropriate. We've done it in-house. It's not appropriate for everybody.
Perfect segue. So question is in-house versus outsourcing it. There's pluses and minuses to both. As far as an in-house, a lot of times we hear from our potential clients or clients once they come aboard, why we consider an in-house model was really more of the control. They really felt that they had a better control of the process if they didn't outsource it. So the question would be is what do you gain by outsourcing it? And if you have the ability to kind of give up some of that control, it's really the benefits of and I think Steve said it best when he kicked off the session this morning, it's the people. It's people dedicated to the function, and this is, quite frankly, their livelihood, their living, and what they eat, drink, and breathe all day long. I mean, this is what, as far as we do as a company, we focus on, as far as the outsourcing model. Training, we spend about 45,000 hours on training a year with our people, so there's a tremendous amount of training. And what I always use the analogy as a specialist. I go to a doctor, and you can go to a general practitioner, or if I have an earache, I'm going to go to a specialist to have that looked at. So it's the same thing for outsourcing. So it's the decision you need to make for your company, what works best, the expertise, the reporting. I'd say to also talk to others, try to get some best practices of what they've done. And the other thing is scalability. An outsourced company like ourselves, I mean, we can scale our customers and clients very, very quickly. And the question is, do you want to be in the people management business, or are you just really interested in the outcome and the outcome of what the process is?
I think that scaling point is really important. I mean, so just, I manage 8 sales development reps today. Frankly, we're having a hard time hiring number 9, number 10, number 11. By the way, I'm looking if you know anybody. But, so the point is, especially here in the Bay Area, right, it's hard, right? And we are spending a lot of time to hire and find these people, whereas it's nice to just have, capacity on demand almost as a utility you can dial up. I guess the one other point I should point out is, at least for us, we promote our SDRs into our sales reps over time. So for us, it's a little bit of a farm team for future sales, which is another reason to do it in-house. But, it's hard to hire, it's hard to manage, and I need more capacity.
But that adds to the challenge, right? So that becomes the farm team, and now you move them up, what do you do? How do you backfill them?
Exactly.
So it's that
continuously hiring.
Yep, it's hard, exactly. So some of the things that we thought would be meaningful as far as considerations for an outsourced agency model, as I mentioned before, Steve said it best, it's really the people. If you feel that you don't have the right skill sets, if this isn't your core competency, then perhaps an agency model is really, an outsourced model is really good for you. Things that you want to look for, do they have the competencies, the experience? Have they done this before? Or basically, you're going to be breaking new ground with them. You want to inquire about their processes and best practices and what they've really done. And you really want to do a cost-benefit analysis. And the good agencies out there can help you, through that process. So I think we're pretty close to being on time if we, boy, is that good. So we're pretty good. If any questions, don't be shy. Yeah, I don't know. Have you done studies at Marketo as far as? I can tell you what we've done.
I have not done an A/B test of that specifically, but I can tell you that when a lead in our business gets qualified by the sales development rep and gets passed over to the account executive, we have on average had 3 SDR touches with them before that occurs. So it's like not exactly your question, right? But it's pretty. I mean, anecdotally, that to me suggests it's pretty clear that if I didn't call these people with relevant calls at the right time and only relied on email, that I would be leaving something on the table.
Yeah, at Televerde, before we became an agency partner, Marketo, we were strictly tele. We were doing lead nurturing via tele and making lots of phone calls. So we've seen a fairly drastic reduction in the number of calls we have to make. That's why I said it was 16 at one point, down to 6 or 8 because of that nurturing process.
There's another important point, just to segue, as long as we're kind of in the free-form section, where the human touch really matters, and that's the top of the funnel, right? If I have a list of relevant people that I want to target, you can't just drop them into an email nurture campaign and assume I'm going to build a relationship against this cold list where I don't even have any opt-in permission. So I think in many cases, the human touch can be a great way to kick off the process, right? You reach out. If you actually connect to somebody, you have a conversation, you can obviously know who they are, what's relevant to them, where they are in the buying cycle, and get permission to contact them. And that's a binary ROI. You would either be able to nurture them or you're not. And
that's actually a great point.
For the human touch.
Yeah, we have a client right now that we're working with, and one of the things with like a trusted IP, which we work with Marketo, as for everything has to be opt-in. So how do you do that? How do you do that effectively? So the client said and came to us and says, part of a tele-campaign, can you help us get these potential leads opted in? So that's what we're working on. So there's a nice integration between the tele aspect and now getting a truly opted-in list of interested parties.
There's a question back there.
I have a thought about our sales guy still loves cold calling.
Sales guy loves cold calling.
Loves cold calling.
Yeah, well,
I have a job for him.
And I'm producing a lot of content, getting a lot of hits through LinkedIn, Twitter, and such, and coming to the website. I'm of the thought that cold calling just pisses people off, and it's invading the space, and because I feel that it's not, they haven't really qualified well enough to actually get in there and come with the goods. So what are your thoughts on cold calling?
Well, there's actually a lot of schools of thought on cold calling. That's what's so wonderful about the nurture process, because you're starting to build that relationship. And that's what this is, at the end of the day, it's all about. Sales and the nurture process helps the sales rep up front, at the top of that funnel, start building that relationship. I've heard cold calling is dead. Ironically, last year I went to actually a course myself, Cold Calling College. As I was doing some cold calling, I'd been out of it for a number of years, so there's still some validity to the cold calling process. To me, it's actually looking at how do you accelerate the interest, and nurture is, to me, the solution. So there is still some cold calling, but it's then being augmented with a nurture process.
I think it's about relevance. Like if somebody calls me up, if I'm in an early stage, somebody calls me up trying to sell me a social media monitoring solution. Right? I'm not actively looking to buy social media monitoring right now. I could buy it, right? I'm a qualified buyer. So somebody calls me up and says, hey, would you like to buy my social media monitoring solution? You're annoying me, right? Because that's not relevant to where I am right now. Somebody calls me up and has a really interesting set of research about best practices, or, I don't know, just something, I'm making this up as I go, but something around, what my competitors are doing around social media monitoring. Now all of a sudden, I'm leaning forward in my, virtual seat, right? And so, it's people. If you're going to cold call effectively, remember that 93% of the people you're calling are early stage buyers who don't actually care about your business right now. And if you can find a way to actually, therefore, have a relevant dialogue, I think it's okay. But most people are really bad at that.
And you're right. Most of the traffic we're getting are people looking for that next batch of info about the competitors in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the alignment, as we look at the 6 stages, two within each of early, mid, and late stage nurturing, absolutely. And quite frankly, it's one of the challenges. developing content, and if Larry Fleischman, our director of marketing, was here, he'd be probably running over to you right now and want to give you a big hug, because clearly content is really king. I mean, it's really about delivering the right message at the right time, but you have to have that content to serve it up. So yeah.
Great. Appreciate it, guys. We're out of time. We're going to start the next person.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Good.